In episode 2, part 2 picks up where part 1 left off. When we last left Lynx-o and the Thunderkittens at the Tower of Omens, they were being captured by Tugmug and Red Eye of the Lunatacs. So it's now up to the rest of the Thundercats who are in the Thunder Tank to rescue them. Before I go any further, we also learned back in part 1 that thanks to Mum-Ra and his canine pal, they were forcing the Snarls to become slaves on New Thundera, to force them to find the long-lost treasures on Dondera, which Jaga, also back in part 1, had told Lionel about back at the Pyramid's Tomb Chamber, and along with Panthro. So now it's up to the Thundercats to stop Mumra for finding the long-lost treasures and the Sword of Plundor. So anyway, back with the Thundercats in the Thunder Tank, they were trying to hurry to get to the tower. On the way there, that's when Snarf had spotted a Lunatacker that was about to leave the tower. Now remember, that's the same vehicle that was used back in part 1 by Red Eye and Tugmug of the Lunatacs, and told Pomara to attack it. But Lionel told her not to because he says that he's getting worried that if he fires on the Lunatacker, then they'll hurt Lynx-o and the Thunderkittens that were inside. Instead, Lionel has a better idea. So what better way to project the Thundercat signal from his sword, just like what any good guy would do. So that's what Lionel did. So, thanks to the Thundercat signal, the Lunatacker stopped in its tracks in the middle of nowhere. So back with the Thunder Tank, now that it's pulled up where the Lunatacker stopped at, Lionel uses his sword power, and when he did, the Lunatacker exploded, and that ejected both Red Eye and, of course, Tugmug of the Lunatacs, but also Lynx-o and the Thunderkittens, but luckily they survived intact. So when Red Eye and Tugmug had found out what had happened, they were surrounded by Lionel, Chitara, Snarf, and Palmyra, who told them to hit the road. Otherwise, as Lionel says in his case, they won't be so easy on the Lunatics themselves, meaning Red Eye and Tugmug. So meanwhile at Sky Tomb at Fire Rock Mountain, it was in the Sky Tomb's control room, though it is confirmed that both Red Eye and Tugmug had told their leader Luna the bad news. And let's not forget Vultureman, he heard the bad news too. So after hearing about it, he got upset with Luna, the leader of the Lunatacs. So Vultureman told Luna, the leader of the Lunatics, to say, I told you to take someone else besides Red Eye and Tugmug, but no one would listen to me, he said. And most of all, Vultureman said to Luna, you know best. He's not kidding. So Luna has her turn to plead her case to Vultureman to say, I don't have to listen to you anyway. Well, it's a shame you should have listened to me, Vultureman said when it's his turn to plead his case. Because if you had, you would have taken both of the fortresses at once, the tower and the castle themselves, he said. Then, long story short, both Luna, the leader of the Lunatics, and Vultureman are arguing among themselves. For Luna, that was the last straw. She had reached her limit. So guess what she did? She committed amok to pick up Vultureman over his head and escorts him out. And then after that, Amok tosses him out of the Sky Tomb. So after Vultureman got escorted and thrown out, that's when he pleaded his case to say, all right, if that's how you feel about it, then I'll go on my own, he said. And so he heads off. So meanwhile, at the Castellar's hangar, so though it's being confirmed that Lynx-o and the kittens had to go back to the tower after they're being rescued, while the rest of the Thundercats are in the Castellar's hangar building booster rockets on the Fiat liner. That was until the Thunderstrike comes and inside were Lynx-o and the Thunderkittens. So after Lionel had approached the Thunder Strike where it landed, out comes Wily Kid. So he's asking the Thunderkittens and Lynx-o, what brings you by? Well, Wily Kid said, you're not going to believe this, but we just found out what happened. Then Wily Kid said to Lionel, even better, we recorded everything that's happened on Dondera. So meanwhile, in the Castellar's control room, we have Lionel, Chitara, Panthro, Tigra, Lynx-o, the Thunder Kitten, Snarf, and his nephew. So, Wily Kid begins to explain what happened when Lynx-o had found out on his braille board. She said that this is New Thundera. What's different about it is that it's a lot bigger than the old one. Even better, Wily Kid said. They have new homes for the Thundercats to live in. Of course, what Wily Kid said next to the Thundercats that this is the good news. And then Wily Cat, who's Wily Kid's brother, says, now here comes the bad news. He said the new Thunder is surrounded by the moons of Plundar. Now remember, the moons of Plundar is what Lynx-o had mentioned since back in season 2 is where the Lunatacs originally came from, before they arrived on their Earth. So Wily Kid, even though she agrees with Snurf with what he just said, that's when Wily Kid says, wait, there's more. It gets worse. There are places that have never been discovered yet, she said. So the first location that the Thundercats, including the two Snarfs, has seen first is called the Mountains of the Moon, and there are Snarfs there. There's more, Wily Kid said. She said that the Mountains of the Moon is being influenced by the first moon of Plundar, and that's where Tugmug comes from. Now Tigra, who agrees with Wily Kid, he said that the Mountains of the Moon is allowed Tugmug to move around a little. That explains his gravitational power itself. With that and the gravity gun that Tugmug uses. And of course those three springs on his feet which allows him to move around just like he did on the Earth. So Panthro pleaded his case by asking a question. You mean to say that the Mountains of the Moon will have some gravitational problems? I'm afraid it's true, Lynx-o said when he answered Panthro's question. But, he said, there is a solution. If we can get some anti-gravitational equipment, like those anti-gravity boosts, that might help a lot, he says. And that's when Kid says, wait, here's some even worse news. Then, as the Thundercats saw on screen, the next location is called the Caverns of Cold. And there at the Caverns of Cold were the enslaved Snarfs, and they were there too. Now Snarf and his nephew were very horrified. They just couldn't believe what they'd seen. And you can tell that in Snarf's case, he just couldn't stand it anymore. So he went to Lino and says, those poor Snarfs are suffering. We gotta do something. We have to save them. I know, Lino said. Don't worry, we will. So after Lionel made an assurance with Smurf that everything would be fine and he's going to do what he can, that's when Wily Cat said that the Snarfs are working there too, just like what they did at the Mountains of the Moon. Then it's Wily Cat's turn to say that the Caverns of Cold is surrounded by the second moon of Plundar, and that's where Chilla comes from. As always, Lynx-o comes up with another idea. He says the thermal equipment will help keep us warm in a place like that, he suggested. So, Snarfer, who agrees with Lynx-o, says, of course, thermal thunder underwear, he said. This isn't a joke, Snarf said to Snarfer. Then it's Lynx-o's turn to plead his case to say there's something else you should see. So when Chitara got a little closer to the screen, she said that she couldn't see a thing. Well, Lynx-o, who agrees with Chitara, he said that even though she couldn't see it, but he knows what the place is. It's called the Jungle of Darkness, and it's surrounded by the third moon of Plundar, and that's where Red Eye comes from, and that explains his infrared vision. Then Lynx-o says that they may work for him, but for the rest of the Thundercats, what they need is some infrared goggles. That way they can see much better in the Jungle of Darkness, Lynx-o suggested. Now, Panther has his turn to agree with Tiger that they're going to need all the equipment that they need if they had to survive New Thundera. That means they're going to need thermal suits for the Caverns of Cold, anti-gravity boots for the Mountains of the Moon, and infrared goggles for the Jungle of Darkness. So Tiger, who agrees with Panthro, he says, well, and I guess there's no time to lose. I best get started on those ideas right away. And so that's what he did. So outside Kessler, there's Vultureman of the Mutants, and he was busy spying on them in the Kessler's hangar. Now remember back in part 1, they were building the booster rockets for the Feliners, so that's what the Thundercats are doing. So now all Vultureman has to do is just listen in so that he can find out what they're doing and what they're up to. The first thing that Vultureman heard was the voice of Chitara. She says, boy, I just can't wait to see the look on Mumra's face when we show up, she says. And when Vultureman heard that, he was in shock. Well, despite a minor setback, that's when Vultureman pleaded himself a case to say, Mumra, What's he doing there on Thundera? He asked himself. Now, Vultureman also asked himself, what's going on there? Why is he there? Then Vultureman hears the voice of Panthro. He was asked by Lionel, how long will it take? Well, we're ready to go in 48 hours, Panthro said. Then Vultureman hears the voice of Tigra next. He says, the sooner we get the booster rockets on the Feliner done, the sooner we'll get there. Chitara was more than happy to hear it, so Vultureman hears from her next. She says, that means we don't have to take the suspension capsules while we arrive. So that's the good news for the Thundercats. So back with Vultureman after he found out what had happened. So he says, so the Thundercats wanted to visit Mumra and give him a surprise, huh? So you know what this means. Vultureman has a plan. He has to prevent this from happening. So you're probably wondering, how is Vultureman going to pull it off? Well, he says to himself that the only way to stop the Thundercats from reaching New Thundera is if Vultureman can get himself a spaceship. A rat star, that is. So that's exactly what happened. So meanwhile at Castle Plodor, that's what Vultureman did. He contacted the rat star to arrive in the front of the castle. Also outside the castle were Jackalman and Monkey. After, despite the fact that Vultureman had hurt himself, by accident of course. So long story short, after Vultureman was not exactly amused with laughing and humiliating, that's when he asked Jackalman a question of why he couldn't just help him instead of standing around. So Monkey pleaded his case to ask a question. What's your hurry? Then Monkey had pleaded a case that since 2 seasons ago in episodes 29 and 30, that rat star hasn't been flown since the Thundercats destroyed it, or so they thought. Well, Vultureman has his turn to plead a case to say not only that what Monkey said is true, but his thing is to be prepared for anything after Monkey had asked him what's the big deal and why he's in such a hurry like that. Well, according to Vultureman, what he said also in this case this day, you just never know what you're going to need until you needed it. Now, inside the castle was Sly, the leader of the mutants, and he had himself a case to say Vultureman's up to something, and he couldn't figure out why. But just in case, he said to himself, he has to keep an eye out on him. So that's what happened. So meanwhile, in the Castler's meeting room, we have Lionel, Chitara, Panthro, Tigra, the Thunderkittens, Lynx-o, Palmyra, Bengali, Snarf, and his nephew. Lionel was talking about how he and his friends will go to New Dundera to stop Mumra. And of course, Snarfer, who agrees with him and says, we're afraid of Snarfs too. Well, that's true, Lionel says, but I'm afraid of Sirius. It's more than that. Because if Mumra gets his hands on the treasures on Dundera, this could mean bad news. Then Lionel also says that could also mean bad news if Mumra gets his hands on the Sword of Plundor, and this could mean the end for the Thundercats. Then Lionel says, now here comes the hard part. Some of us will have to stay behind while we go on our mission. So what Lionel did is that he's asking Lynx-o and Palmyra to take care of the Tower of Omens. In the meantime, Bengali, as Lionel says, will take care of the lair. Although Bengali doesn't agree with this, but he understands perfectly. Now, the Thunderkittens, according to what Lionel says, their job is to stay on the Earth, but they'll work in separate shifts. So, Wily Kid will stay with Bengali, while her brother will stay with Lynx-o and Palmyra at the tower. But Wily Cat has his turn to plead his case to Lionel to say, we've never been apart before. We've always been a team. Well, that's true, Lionel says, but we all have a role to play in this. And a part as well, he said. Then Lionel says, though granted we are a team, but if we want to pull through to succeed in our mission, we have our own parts to play. So we're going to need you in this, he said. So finally, after Lionel says this, the Thunderkittens agreed. So back with Vultureman inside the Rat Star that's parked outside Castle Plundor, he's checking all the systems, he's checking all the engines, he's checking all the weapons, just like everybody would. So once everything's okay, Vultureman Ned also made sure that it's ready to go. So now that the rat star is ready to go, it took off from the castle. The first man notice out of the castle is Jackalman. So he says, "Hey, Vultureman, where are you going?" Next up is Monkey. So he's asking Jackalman, "What happened? What's going on?" So Jackalman says, "I'm not sure. Go find Slythe. Tell him about this." "I can't," Monkey says, "because he said to Jackalman that there's bad news. Slythe is missing." So both Monkey and Jackalman both say, "Oh no, we're all by ourselves." So back with the Rastar who just left Castle Plondar. So in the Rastar's control room, we hear Vultureman pleading his case to say he's going to get rid of the Thundercats, and then he and Mumra, by the time they meet up on New Thunder, they'll rule both planets and etc. So meanwhile, at the Cat's hangar, well, good news for the Thundercats now that the booster rockets are finished on the Feeliner, it was now time for the Thundercats to head to New Thundera. We have Lionel, Chitara, Panthro, Tigra, the two Snarfs, Snarf and his nephew, and they're heading off. But what they didn't know is that something or someone else is trying to stop them. So back with the Restar and with Vultureman that's in the Restar's control room, he pleaded himself to case to say nothing's going to stop him. He's the smartest and etc. But then he heard a voice saying, "Not yet, you're not. It's Sly, the leader of the mutants." Now Vultureman was in shock, so he asked, "What are you doing here?" "Why, I'm protecting my interests," I said, "and I think you owe me an explanation for this," he said. Now, whether Vultureman did explain to Slythe or not, I can't say for sure. So long story short, back with the Thundercats in the Feeliner, they were almost leaving Third Earth. But then Tiger said to Panther that there's a Rastar there. And wouldn't you know it, Tiger was soon proven right when a Rastar comes out from out of nowhere with a cannon to start having an attack on a Feeliner. Meanwhile, Panther says, "Hang on, we're going to invasive attack." So back with the Rastar, after it uses the cannon, it fired right at the Feeliner. The five Thundercats, the two Snarfs, Panther, Chitara, Lino, and Tigra, are in serious trouble. So long story short, meanwhile in the Kessler's control room, Wily Kid was asking Bengali to come quickly. When Bengali had arrived in the control room, that's when Wily Kid says, "We have a problem. The Rastar is attacking the Feeliner," she said. So after Wily Kid had told Bengali that the Thundercats are in serious trouble, that's when Bengali told her, "You must contact Lynx-o at the tower," he said. Then Bengali says to her, "When you're done doing that, meet me at the hangar." And so he heads off. So, back with the Rastar that's still in the sky attacking the Feeliner, inside were Sly, the leader of the mutants, and Vultureman. So he made a compliment with Vultureman to say, "Congratulations. We just stopped the Thundercats excavation before it could begin," he said. So after Sly had pleaded his case to say that Mummer would be pleased with him, "I wouldn't laugh just yet," Vultureman says, "because as he says in his case, and he's not kidding, after all, Thundercats do have 9 lives." So back with the Thundercats in the Feeliner after it was being attacked again by the Rastar's cannon, things are looking bad for them. When meanwhile in the Kessler's control room, Violet Kit was frightened with worry and she says, "Oh dear, we'll never get there in time." So back with the Thundercats in the Feeliner, they're frozen for now, but the only two that were never frozen were Snarf and his nephew, and he was pleading with Lionel to do something about it, but Lionel wouldn't move. So back with Bengali and Wildcat in the Cat's hangar, they are on the Thunderclaw. So now that both Wildcat and Bengali were on the Thunderclaw, they left the Cat's hangar. Now Wildcat's getting really worried, and then she told Bengali, "This Thunderclaw's not fast enough to get there in time," she said. Although Bengali tries to encourage her the best way he knew how, he says, "We can't give up yet. It'll take more than the Rastar's cannon to finish off Lino and his friends," he said. So back with the Feeliner, the Snarfs are trying desperately to get the Thundercats to move, but they're not moving anywhere. And then Snarfer just let slip to his nephew is that because the Thundercats cannot move and that they could, that's because for one simple reason, the Red Star's cannon didn't affect them in any way. So Snarf tries to get to wake up Lionel to say he's needed, the Thundercats need him, and that there's no way that he's going to let them down, and etc. But still nothing happened. He still can't move. Well, long story short, in Snarfer's case, desperate times comes for desperate measures. He needs to calm his uncle down. And so what he did is that he grabs the Thundercat water spritzer and spritz his uncle. And I guess you could say Snarf didn't like it at least a bit, and he's asking, "What you doing that for?" "Sorry, Uncle," Snarfer said, "but we gotta do something." That's when the feline continues to go out of control. So, Snarfer was told by Snarf, "Well, do something about it." But Snarfer said that he can't, and the reason why is because when he tries to get Panther to let go of the controls, he wouldn't budge. But then, Snarf has a plan. The only way to wake up Lionel is to get the Sword of Omens, which he did, and then he tries to open up Lionel's hand, which also he did, and then closes the handle on the sword with his hand, and said, "Please, Lionel, wake up! We need you," he said. By surprise, Lionel begins to say something to Snarf. He says, "Snarf, I can't move. It feels like I've been frozen in place." "Please try," Snarf said. So Snarf made a desperate plea of a case to Lionel to say, try to use the sword and that he's their only hope and to save them and etc. Then Snarf continues to plead a case to say, "Please, if we don't get to Thundera soon, then this can mean bad news and the end of all of us," he said. Finally, thanks to Snarf closing the hand on the sword with Lino, luckily Lino begins to move again. And so he did what any good guy would do, use his sword of omens to project the Thundercat signal from his sword. And when he did, Panther started to move again, and then Tiger, and then Chitara. So good news, everybody started moving again, including the feliner. But even better, remember Bengali and Wily Cat on the Thunderclaw? When they saw the signal, they were on their way. So long story short, now that all of the Thundercats, including the feliner, are no longer frozen in place, watching it happen were the mutants, Slide, the leader of the mutants, and Vultureman that were on the screen in the Red Star's control room. So Slide got upset with Vultureman, and he's asking, "What have you done? I thought you finished them. You really bungled it up," Slide said. So after Slide had pleaded a case to say that the Thundercats will be coming after them, "Just relax," Vultureman said. "Nothing can withstand the weary cannon." But then something just attacked the Red Star from outside. It's the Thunderclaw, with Bengali and Wily Kid inside of it. So long story short, after the Thunderclaw got attacked by the cannon of the Red Star, so in the Red Star's control room, and that's when Sly says, "Never mind that. Forget the Thunderclaw. The feliner's heading this way," he said. So long story short, thanks to Lionel's sword power, it went inside the cannon. And that causes the cannon to explode, and inside the Red Star's control room, the controls exploded too. So because of the sword's power and the control room's explosion and the cannon as well with the Red Star, it started to go out of control. Luckily for Bengali and Wily Kid on the Thunderclaw, well, good news, the Thunderclaw had managed to regain control, but not so for the Red Star. It continued to sink out of control. That was until at last the Red Star had crashed into Hook Mountain. As for the feliner, good news for them, the Thundercats are now on their way to New Thundera. The Thundercats cheered. So, Snarf was telling Lionel, "Well, we're about to have a rescue mission before we were rudely interrupted." "So we are," Lionel says, because he happens to agree with Snarf. But then suddenly the feliner gets a transmission from Lynx-o at the Tower of Omens on Third Earth. So Lionel says, "Go ahead, Lynx-o." Then Lynx-o told Lionel and the rest of the Thundercats and the two Snarfs to say, "I'm afraid there's bad news," he said. Then Lynx-o explains further that there's something weird going on Thundera, a volcanic activity. But what makes it even worse, according to Lynx-o, Mumra is there. And the reason why Mumra is there is because you're probably wondering what was Lynx-o's bad news? Well, Mumra's about to summon the Sword of Plondor. And with that, he can get rid of the Thundercats and to reclaim the treasures of Dundera. Now there's only one question. Can the Thundercats make it there in time? And what about the stars? Will the Thundercats save them? So that ends episode 2 in part 2.